Okay, well, turning to the special session and this session, what grades would you give them?
I'd say I'd give the overall session and special session, the overall session, kind of
Yeah,
the
it's all
special
lumped
session
together.
and kind of finishing our work in the special session. I'd say, a C, because that's a combination of like an A and an F.
Okay. yeah, it's hard to.
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff that went
brush,
really well, and I'm extremely happy about. We came out pretty well in education and some of these judiciary initiatives, and worked very hard on housing for homeless youth, some other things. Very disappointed in the failure of the transportation bill to get passed, and some of these just hideous policies, just abominations in the environment bill that I cringe.
And we can get more into that too. I have
that
questions
we actually
about
passed
that.
those into law. And they're just a tragic outcome with respect to those environmental policies. So, A, F averages to C.
All right, and we'll dive into a little bit more of those details.
The
as we
F
go
part
forward.
is probably from the House of Representatives, and I would agree on that if we're looking at that, because the budget bills as they passed off the House floor, the Republican House floor, were really setting the state back in so many fundamental ways. All of the progress we've made, for example, on renewable energy and climate change was reversed in the House energy bill. The environment bill was just a buffet for special interests and polluters in terms of what they got out of that. The education bill, as it left the House floor, had significantly less money than the final bill. And of course, the House Republicans really got in the way of our progress on transportation. The Senate DFL and the governor had a strong plan on the table that was really in large part rejected. So, if we're going to give an average grade to the legislature, I'd certainly give a failing grade to the work of the Minnesota House.
Okay.
Well, as long as we're piling on the House, it's important for people to know that the House, the central supporting column of the House budget proposal was, remember we had what was our surplus?
$1.9 billion.
1.9. So it's $2 billion surplus, and so what they opted to do was to cut $1 billion from Health and Human Services. So that means that the poorest, the sickest, and the elderly would receive less or no health care and supportive services. So people with disabilities who are supported in their homes so they can live dignified lives. People who access Medicaid, and that's how they get their health care, because they need health care insurance through a publicly supported program, because otherwise they can't afford it. Utter elimination of Minnesota Care, which allows people of modest income who are entrepreneurs or working people, so how they access health insurance is through Minnesota Care. Eliminated. $1 billion cut, while at the same time giving $2 billion in tax cuts and tax relief
tax breaks
to rich people and corporations who don't need it, which grows in a very short period of time to over $4 billion, which would return us back into permanent deficit spending like we had under Tim Pawlenty. This was the House proposal in a time when we've shown that good public investments and good public services allows our economy and allows people to succeed. It was unconscionable and shocked the sensibility. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
And in my 13 years, and I've served both in the majority and minority, this was clearly the most extreme budget and set of policies that we've seen from the House Republicans. And again, the special interests, the polluters, large corporations really had their way in the House, and that has got to be reversed if we're going to make progress in the state. Scott used the term unconscionable. I would echo that. In a time of incredible surplus, and $1.9 billion, to use our state's good fortune to provide more tax breaks to large corporations and wealthy individuals is outrageous. So at least those were in large part reversed, but we still have $1 billion sitting out there. And so there's going to be some important decisions that we still have to make in 2016 on this budget. And you can bet that the Republicans will be back with proposals for more corporate tax breaks and tax breaks for the wealthy.
And, what about process? There's been a lot of criticism about process and so much happening, so many big decisions, behind closed doors with a few people. Talk about that.
Well, I can't defend the process at all because I'm extremely critical of it, and I do that both very, very critical of how the Senate handled matters as well as the House. The simple fact is that decisions were made in the very, very closing hours of the legislature, of the regular session, by basically two people, the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader, and then these what we call omnibus bills, these large bills with both finance and policy measures, which was a change from how things were going to occur. Finance was going to be dealt with separate and apart from policy for a very good reason, which I'll get into in a minute. And so then the conference committees, the various committees of jurisdiction that had representatives from both House and Senate, basically were kind of given instructions on the bills to compose. They were cobbled together very, very quickly without the benefit of real a hearing process in which the public could actually see, review, comment, or at least even know about the language of major decisions moving millions of dollars and dramatically changing the laws of our state. No opportunity, this is all. And then these bills were slapped together. There weren't even paper copies. We literally had no time to read them. And were asked to vote on them in the very, very literally the closing hours and minutes of the session. So agreements by these two. Remember, there's 201 legislators. House members represent over 40,000 individuals. Senators represent over 80,000 individuals. We each have an election certificate. We're elected to represent the interests of our constituents as well as the principles and values which we represented as a rationale for our candidacy. We had no ability to really know in those bills whether or not we're fulfilling our basic responsibilities, our basic democratic responsibilities. And so, not unexpectedly, there were provisions in these must-pass bills in order to keep government functioning that I, for example, wouldn't have supported had I known. So in a couple of instances, I voted for things that I regret voting for because I didn't know they were in the bills. Of course, attempted, very valiantly to, if I can characterize myself as valiant, very, very vehemently to defeat this environment bill because we knew we had some indication that there were at least 13 provisions that really set us backwards in terms of poisoning our air and land and water. We failed at that. It was vetoed by the governor, so we made a second attempt in special, failed on our second try as well. So the process was deeply flawed. It has to change. It's not acceptable. This is a democracy, and this is about transparency and the people's ability to know what's going on with their government. It's the only way they can hold us to account.
So what needs to happen to make it change? Yeah.
I have some definite thoughts about that.
Okay.
But if you or your readers really want to see what Scott is describing very directly on video, you could Google End of Minnesota House Session 2015, and you'll see video of the final seconds where we were asked to vote on a really horrible jobs and energy bill. I mean, this was the bill that really rolled back so much progress that we've made, on energy and environmental issues. It had really bad provisions around all kinds of things. And, so we were asked to vote on that and at the very last minute, and no one knew it was in the bill. And, you'll see footage of House members literally asking the Speaker to suspend the vote because we haven't read the bill that's in front of us that we're being asked to vote on. That's how bad, this process ended up being. So, I think that we, at the beginning of the session, we're very careful about making sure bills are posted in a timely way, and that even amendments to bills are posted 24 hours ahead of time so the public can comment on those. We're very conscious of making sure that the public can testify at hearings, so that at the beginning of the session, we are very, very good about transparency. Maybe not as great as we can be, but we really try to leave no stone unturned, and then that all gets thrown away at the end. So part of what we need are very specific deadlines ahead of the end of the session, so that none of this transparency is compromised at any point during the process. But right now, just because it's either tradition or for various reasons, it's accepted that the leadership will go behind closed doors and negotiate deals. I think that it was so flawed this year that we are really going to be calling for a lot of reform and opportunities to change this. I have talked to a lot of constituents that, unlike in past years, they were very aware of the fact of this very flawed process. And it was really today Senator Dibble and I attended and spoke at a press conference, which I think the decision to end the Citizens Board of the Pollution Control Agency, if you were to sum up the bad process and the bad outcomes, I really strongly believe that bad process leads to bad outcomes. And one of the things that happened this year was this elimination of a Citizens Board that's been in existence for almost 50 years. It's a wonderful opportunity for citizens to weigh in on very important environmental decisions that the Pollution Control Agency makes. The polluters and the corporate special interests have had their eyes on getting rid of this board for some time now, and chose this year as the year to act. And again, this was an example of something that was not in any bill, that was never heard. I mean, there were some provisions around the Citizens Board and limiting its powers, but never eliminating the board itself. This is an example of what Scott was talking about, where there's something never in a bill, never heard, appears, and now it's law. And so today was the last meeting of that Citizens Board. And this is a board where citizens can participate, they can weigh in, they can review permits. Ironically, the board very rarely denied a permit for pollution that the PCA was initiating. I was happy to be part of one example in the 90s where we reversed a garbage incinerator permit in Dakota County, but that's exceedingly rare. Even the decision to ask for additional environmental study is rarely taken. But that was the one that the polluters really seized on this year. And because the Citizens Board asked for an environmental impact statement on a polluting dairy operation in northwest Minnesota, that was ostensibly the reason why it was taken away. So you have the special interests versus the common good, and so many of these issues, and it was really exemplified in the PCA board decision, the decision to eliminate. Do you have some ideas about reform as well?
Well, just in practical terms, we just kind of follow our own rules, which are basically based in transparency, fair play, and accountability. We have rules around provisions showing up that have never seen the light of day in our conference committee reports. Those are clearly broken repeatedly. We have rules around making sure that bills that the conference committees meet in the open with a minimum allowing the public to watch and observe and understand what's being discussed and what's being included in a conference committee report. Ideally, of course, allowing the opportunity for the public to come to the table and provide input and testimony, and people who can't physically be present have the opportunity to see what's included and call their legislators with advice about what's being included in these omnibus bills, and also making sure that these documents, what we call conference committee reports, the omnibus bills, are posted online and available in print, so that all the legislators, all the agencies, the public, all the stakeholders can see what's being considered with sufficient time to digest, analyze, and provide input before final debate and vote is taken up on the floor of the respective chambers. So that's the minimum.
And to show you how far the other way we've come, Scott and I were part of a group of, I think, 37 legislators, I don't know the exact number, that sent a letter prior to the special session demanding that we at least have a public hearing on these bills. You know, there were, we ideally should have been able to amend them and to have a little bit more of a robust process around them. But, you know, had we not asked for it, we would have gone into special session and just voted up or down on bills, even without the benefit of a public hearing. So these are really, you know, the kinds of things that we're up against in terms of transparent process.
So we did have hearings, but they were informal hearings without the opportunity to make amendments in the committee process because it was prior to the actual convening of the special session. So there were joint Ways and Means Finance hearings that were held for, at least for the purpose of disclosing the contents of the bills. Some little adjustments.
Yeah, we were able. Both of us sit in our respective chambers. Me in the House and Scott in the Senate. We sit on the Finance and Ways and Means Committee, so we were both able to weigh in and ask questions. But that's not the same as you know, being able to amend the bills and to really have a robust discussion.
Right. What about other environmental issues too? I mean, you're talking about the MPCA Citizens Board. Other things that came up during session that were concerning or positive, for that matter.
Well, concerning is again under the cover of night, without the scrutiny, or really the ability to even understand its implications and exemption from solid waste rules for the waste that results from sulfide mining, these copper nickel mines that threaten the water quality of the very sensitive northern lakes region. So, you know, they're going to be doing this enormous copper nickel mining, you know, huge mine pit. And the tailings from copper nickel mines result in sulfuric acid runoff. Unless it's contained properly. It's never been contained in any copper mine in the entire world, so I don't know why we are going to be magically able to do it. And so the waste product that results is exempted from our existing solid waste rules. No one had any idea. No one really knows what the implications are for that, so that's bad. Something that could have been good, but then was completely unwound and becomes bad, is kicking off the kind of the next generation of ethanol using cellulosic plant stock, and so maybe moving away from corn itself as an avenue, except that now we're locked into with this initiative to using the remnants of corn crops. So and as we know, this massive conversion to these monocultures of beans and corn for the most part has resulted in this huge spike in nitrogen in our surface waters, dramatic degradation of water quality over the last decade plus. A good item, you know, Governor was pretty adamant about, and I think part of how some of these things ended up getting passed was because he really wanted to establish what are called buffer zones. I think people in our district are familiar with the plantings that are around the edges of our chain of lakes, which do a phenomenally effective job of improving lake quality by stopping and slowing down runoff as it comes towards the lakes. We also have the detention ponds, those sorts of things. So these buffer zones, which are responsible for all this nitrogen and all this soil that's getting into, like, the Minnesota River, for example. We do really good buffer zones at the edges of surface waters, slows down the water as it's rushing, lets it percolate into the soil, stops the pollution, stops the dirt from running into. So we got that passed. So that was pretty good.
Yeah.
And there were a parade of bills that were really intended to gut the Federal Clean Water Act. You know, this is legislation that's been around since the early 70s. And this is very troubling. One of the provisions that did get signed into law was that, you know, in order for for example, a wastewater treatment facility or other kind of facility to that we think are very important to clean up the water, is proposed that the cost be evaluated. The cost of pollution mitigations be evaluated, but not the benefits. And so to not even have the word benefit in this legislation. It's clearly tilted towards the polluters and towards the entities that want to weaken, really 40 years of precedent since Earth Day. We had the clean, that family of bills around the environmental protection that as a result of the first Earth Day, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act. This is the extent to which the special interests were trying to really gut environmental laws this year. So I'm very troubled by the fact that a few of those did sneak into this bill, and that was one of the reasons why the Senate fought so hard to try to improve it, and voted no, a couple of times. So, unfortunately, there were a few of these provisions that did sneak into the conference committee report, and it's very troubling.
And to move to transportation, when I talked to you both about a year ago, you seemed more optimistic about the viability of a transportation package.
Yeah.
So what happened this year, and where do you go next? What's the next step?
Well, what happened? So the short version of what happened is that the House Republicans, as directed by the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce and the Minnesota Business Partnership, were adamant that their entire definition of success with respect to transportation, despite all the rhetoric over the last year, including during the election cycle, that we have to do something for transit, was to stop any new resources coming to the table to pay for what has been identified as, just in the state road system alone, a $6 billion per year deficit. Mm-hmm. So they succeeded in that, locking down all the House Republicans from considering $1 new of revenue for that purpose, and that became that became the sum total kind of zero-sum game of the entire debate. It really devolved into something really stupid. They started off they started off questioning the need. So we spent a lot of time just being quite resolute and confident in what has been the accepted identified need for transit in the metropolitan area, for Greater Minnesota Transit, for state highways and bridges, and for local roads and bridges. And that number, of course, is north of $6 billion because, I say $6 billion per year, about $600 million per year, $6 billion over 10 years, just in the roadway system. And then you add another $300 or so million per year for transit and some of those other things. Anyways, and so they introduced an initial bill that would have paved like 30 miles of. It was and nothing for transit. It was, of course, absurd on its face. So we kind of got past that after many, many months. So we're kind of in this weird never land for quite a while, because we couldn't even have the beginnings of a meaningful conversation. Finally came around to really understanding, the orders of magnitude, at least in the road and bridge side of the equation, was the same. But then that conversation came around. Are we going to devote existing general fund resources, or are we going to raise some of those additional traditional sources in ways that are sustainable? Gas tax, motor license tab fees, some other sources. But they persisted in their insistence that we were going to do nothing for transit. In fact, so the second version of their bill delivered what would end up with stopping dead in its tracks all new investments in transitways, bus rapid transit, arterial rapid transit, light rail transit, streetcars in the metropolitan area. So just throw all of that out and cut regular route bus service by 25%.
And this is the really troubling part, is that, I had heard rhetoric in the past that they didn't like rail, but they were cutting every single aspect of bus service. Local buses, what we call bus rapid transit systems on freeways and dedicated guideways, and even this new and very exciting effort by the Met Council to do what we call arterial bus rapid transit, which is really speeding up the buses on our busier streets and having improved shelters and people being able to access very easily when the next bus is coming. It's just a real important step forward. They didn't even want any investments in that. very specifically stop those. So it was really a disastrous approach to not only roads and bridges, but also transit.
Is there any chance of anything happening next year on transportation? Or?
Well, so we did end up getting into conference committee. So the House passed their version, Senate passed its version, and we got to conference committee, and that conference committee remains open. So that bill still is an active bill through the end of our adjournment next year.
Okay.
Because we are in this biennial cycle. And kind of the outline of the deal that's been articulated is that because the House Republicans really came into the session with a priority of really serving up significant tax cuts for their benefactors, the wealthy and the corporations, and I still think they want to accomplish that. And there may be some tax policies that's not completely offensive to the conscience, and we can maybe figure out some things that make some sense in terms of I wouldn't say that the surplus resulted from overtaxing folks. It's resulted from a booming economy.
Right.
And so receipts that were projected came in above what the projection anticipated. That's normal. Because that's just the nature of forecasting. You kind of establish a budget based on a conservative estimate of what you think you're going to receive in tax revenue, and a fairly conservative estimate of what you're going to need to pay for in public services based on existing law, and things change that you don't anticipate necessarily, or trends continue in ways that you don't completely project with total precision. That means that you can make adjustments along the way, and so that's cool. And then, so in exchange for this thing that they want so bad, they clearly have identified that Democrats, although we all should want transportation, but Democrats apparently want to deliver basic infrastructure to assist and boost our economy. So that's what we bring to the table. So maybe we can, and there's still, like Frank said, $1 billion sitting on the table to use for transportation purposes. Keep in mind, a lot of that's one-time money, though. We can't use that for ongoing purposes. So we will still need to bring a revenue to the table that's sustained over the long haul to be competitively, economically competitive in terms of our transit investments, make sure that we're sustaining our roadway infrastructure over the long haul, but then maybe get some of these things. So yes, it's possible. I think it's a long shot, though, because it's an election year. I think we've proven
Check
the point.
again in a year from now.
This whole general fund debate and whether or not we should be using general fund dollars for transportation purposes, at least general fund dollars that continue to go into the general fund and then come out on an annual basis appropriated. As soon as there's any sort of friction, tension, competition for those dollars, the things that we do pay for with the general fund, like education, like healthcare, like basic public safety, like partnering with local units of government to take pressure off the property taxes, those things will always be of higher priority because they just have way more immediacy and a lot more political energy around them. The proof of that is how, as soon as we started getting into this debate around healthcare and education, etc., the entire focus of the session, the transportation session, came off of transportation immediately, proving our argument in spades. We cannot use general fund resources appropriated every 2 years for transportation. If we are going to use what now flows through the general fund for transportation, at least for the roads and bridge program, we absolutely need to make sure that it's walled off in some form or fashion.
And we also needed to take action on oil train safety. We've had, again, another spate of explosions of oil and ethanol trains around the country, and the Republicans blocked that as well. We felt that the rail companies that are profiting very handsomely from transporting these dangerous materials through our communities should share the costs with the public sector for improvements, particularly in grade crossings. And we had legislation on that I authored, and that was not something that the Republicans wanted to do. So just a very, very small amount of money set aside from the general fund for grade crossing improvements. And we did manage to at least get ethanol train safety on the agenda, and that was included in the transportation bill that was signed into law. And of course we have a lot of ethanol running through Southwest Minneapolis. And these trains also carry risks similar to the Bakken oil explosion. So at least we got some ethanol train safety provisions in this year, but we really do need to continue to advance this issue forward. And it really affects us. We were able to get another provision around making sure that the rail companies had insurance for these kinds of explosions, and we were able to have some precedent-setting legislation that was included around this reroute of trains in the northwest suburbs that would also affect Minnesota. So we were very concerned about some oil trains coming through our area as a result of that.
Yeah, ones that would go right through downtown.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. And so we have Hennepin County now, thanks to some legislation, has the ability to have eminent domain to be able to alter that and to stop that. So there were some, at least, progress made in that. But back to the overall equation on transportation. Scott and I, during the special session, put forward legislation that would, we felt, meet the Republicans literally halfway. We cut the size of the gas tax. We don't have that as a gross receipts tax anymore, which they objected to, so we had it as a straight-up gas tax. Not the best in terms of transportation policy, but we're willing to compromise on that. We were willing to sort of scale back some of the provisions on the metro sales tax instead of imposing it on 7 counties, having the counties opt in, similar to what they do now. And so we are ready, willing, and able to continue the negotiations. I don't say continue the negotiations. We never really had negotiations on this, but to really continue to find a solution, to find a way forward. We have a proposal on the table that I think is worthy of consideration on their part. But if they're simply going to say we don't want to have any additional revenue, that's a non-starter. And they even have. We're looking at now some of the post-session literature, and they're declaring that the session was a success. The overall session, we're not just talking about one thing or two things. The overall session was a success because we stopped additional revenue for transportation. What kind of message is that? So, we are ready, willing, and able to talk about compromises, and very significant compromises from what we've started from. We have not seen any movement towards that from the other side.
You're texting.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
Thank you. So another something that was included in the transportation bill, which I think will be very helpful, is that we increase significantly the penalties for texting while driving. And so for the second offense, now people will be paying $345, including court fees, for a violation the second time. So we really want to get at these repeat, chronic texters, and they are out there.
Oh yes, I see them downtown, and
this is
really
incredibly dangerous, and we want to send a message from the legislature to the public that we take this very seriously. So we were able to get that provision through, and again, the Senate had a stronger version, but we're glad that at least bipartisanly we were able to include that.
Any other silver linings to the session that you want to make note of? Maybe specific to Minneapolis too, or?
Well, specific to Minneapolis and many other communities, which is how we design roadways, which would be much more responsive to the context in which they are being built and used. So this has to do, of course, with county state aid roads and municipal state aid roads. So our major arterials that go through our communities right now are built too wide to accommodate too much and traffic that goes too fast and basically shoves out.
Yep, I live on one in Washington Avenue. It's definitely that way.
And it's kind of a one size fits all, and if you want to vary those standards, it's both difficult, and then you have to absorb the liability on a local basis. The research does not prove that safety is enhanced at all, quite the opposite. Paradoxically, our state highway design standards are much more responsive, much more current, much more progressive. And so we're going to bring into line our ability to design county state aid highways, municipal state aid roads, with the design standards that we have already established for state highways around the state. And that is a huge success policy change that we've been seeking for many years. And so I'm extremely happy about that.
And while I think we could have done better, given the fact that we had a $1.9 billion surplus, the fact that we did increase funding for the general education formula to 2% on that formula.
2%, so over 4%.
Yeah, is very
for the biennium.
Significant. And that's something that we've wanted to do for a while. And I would have hoped that we had the resources, and I was very supportive of the governor's initiative to have universal pre-K. We still were able to raise revenues for early childhood.
High quality early childhood education.
So I think that both on early childhood and on the general education formula, we did make strides forward. But again, this was not because of anything that the House was putting forward. This really had to do with the governor and the Senate DFL really insisting on increased support. And the governor did veto the education bill. That was the first of 3 bills, I believe, that he vetoed that led to the special session. And as a result of that veto, we were able to get significantly more money, several $100 million additional that we had that we didn't have going out of the regular session. So, I'm pleased with that. And again, we can do more. And we have just huge class sizes in our schools, increased disparities that need to be addressed. And there's, I had a librarian at South High School talk to me yesterday about the fact that they have very few librarians, something as basic to education. In other states, they have legislation that mandates librarians in schools. So we have a lack of guidance counselors. We have a lack of librarians.
We increased our not guidance counselors per se, but they will fall under this umbrella of student support service professionals. So our counselor to student ratio is the lowest in the country.
Right.
We tend to define counselors and other sorts of student support service professionals under the same umbrella. Will increase that ratio significantly. That's a big deal.
Okay. Right. So there's still lots of unfinished business on education, but I do feel that we
made came out far better. The House original proposal, again, it's so hard to understand what they were thinking. They proposed something like $2 million additional for the entire University of Minnesota system, and it only went to 2 particular campuses out in Greater Minnesota. I don't even know which 2. Literally nothing for the system. Literally nothing for the Twin Cities campus. So this kind of we hate the University of Minnesota. I don't know. It's like something in the House. It's weird. And then rather than actually fund the MNSCU system, the state colleges and universities, our technical colleges, our community colleges, and our Mankato State type colleges would fall under the MNSCU umbrella. They sweep out what they perceive to be a surplus in the state grant program, and that's what they use to fund the MNSCU system. So they didn't even going to give $1 to MNSCU and take those dollars away from scholarships and tuition. So we completely reversed that, and we got some significant dollars to the University of Minnesota, a lot of which goes to tuition relief, keeping tuition increases tamped down. Likewise for the MNSCU system, expanding the availability of the state grant, or the amount of the state grant, and the availability to more students, which is a huge achievement. Providing some free scholarships for high demand professions, kind of on a path to ultimately perhaps providing community college tuition for free to all comers, to those who want to pursue that educational path. Additionally, we had one more thought. Anyway, so we did well. We did well by higher ed, and that was a pretty significant achievement.
So, I'm sorry.
No, so I think that. These are important advances, and
there's so much. No, that's good.
Student loans.
I'm impressed by your notes there.
Student loans. So there's this big deal around these for-profit education schools and the financing. They get students leveraged in their debt, and they also take advantage of the state grant, and they don't provide a decent education. They basically rob these kids. It's horrible. And then they turn them out, and they don't have an actual profession that they can use. So full disclosure around what they offer, student retention rates, student graduation rates, student success once they leave their institutions, some additional disclosures around student financing and that sort of thing. Very, very important to get a handle. Especially, there's some good for-profit higher education institutions. but a lot of really bad ones, and we need to really get a handle on those, and ultimately make sure that students aren't able to use state aid for those particular institutions, because they're just robbing us blind.
Now, given the climate, what are your hopes for next session? What do you think is possible in terms of, after everything you described this year, in terms of...
Well, I hope we can get the transportation bill passed. I think it's a long shot. I hope we can institute some of these procedural changes. I think everyone is of a mind that transparency, disclosure, accountability, making sure that it's not just all happening among 2 or 3 people.
Right, yeah.
And being asked for our vote, being asked to basically violate, the terms of our election certificate. That is totally not. So some of those reforms, there's some discrete policy issues that kind of fell to the floor, what we call the Toxic Free Kids Act, and getting a handle on plastic microbeads, making sure that those who have served their time in jail can be restored to full citizenship and be able to vote, making sure that those who are part of our community, that are working in our workplaces and paying taxes and raising kids, can actually drive around and be safe. It's called driver's license for all, even if they don't have full legal status. No one is safer as a result of people driving around without the benefit of insurance or good driver training. The fact is that we rely on these undocumented immigrants very, very heavily for shopping in our stores, paying taxes, and providing service level jobs. And so driver's license for all would be an important goal as well.
Yeah, we absolutely have to have much more engagement in the Capitol with everyday citizens. And I think we have wonderful organizations that are turning people out, but we need more of that. If we learned a couple of lessons this year. Elections matter, and without active citizens, the special interests and the corporations will rule the roost. And so we really need, again, with great grassroots organizing, lots of things that people feel are not possible or can be possible. But the challenges are great, and obviously in some of the areas that I'm very interested in, transportation, the environment in particular, we do need really active citizens engaged from all over the state, making demands of our elected officials and making sure that these issues have urgency to them. So this is going to be really particularly important as we head into this election season, that we have a very active, engaged citizenry, because people can really make a difference. And I can tell you that when it came to rail safety, the Republicans actually had zero, a big goose egg in terms of grade crossing safety or any resources dedicated to this matter. And we had a group of people actually from our district that came and testified before the House Transportation Committee with a demand to include this. And as a result, again,
to include the ethanol?
To include both. Well, that was one issue, but also to include funding in the transportation bill for grade crossings. And as a result of that, at least there was some realization that the Republicans had to include something. So citizens showing up made a difference. And you're absolutely correct on the ethanol legislation. That idea came to us from constituents, and so we were able to write up the bill and get it signed into law. So people really do make a difference and in the process. And so I would just want to again, encourage active citizenship, and people can join organizations, they can show up, but citizens can and have made a difference in terms of outcomes of the legislature. Absolutely. No one should think that that's not critical to the process.
Two more quick points.
Sure.
One is around energy policy. We both work quite a bit on energy policy. And so we actually came in with this thought that let's take the next step on energy conservation and efficiency and the next step on our renewable energy standards, because we've come so far so fast and it has proven to be so cost effective. It's time to take the next step, and all of the studies support that, and even the utilities, especially the investor-owned utilities, the large utilities, agree that this is all very, very achievable. Instead, we had a House that moved the exact opposite direction. So that was very, very disappointing, but we're going to continue.
And the House we had an amendment that we wanted the House to be on record as saying that climate change was real and caused by humans, and that failed. So really, all but one House Republican is now on record as being a denier of the scientific reality of climate change. I mean, that's just how extreme this was, and that was an amendment to the Jobs and Energy Bill.
Right. Who voted yes?
Representative Garofalo, I believe, was the
and he's the one responsible for this terrible package of bills.
Yeah.
And then finally, I just want to say that I'm extremely proud that we took the next step in funding for the Homeless Youth Act.
Okay, yeah.
And we're kind of wrapping in some of the sex trafficking initiatives as well into services for homeless youth. We're on our path to getting the amount of funding that we've identified that would finally actually resolve these issues, both prevent and also address early on once homeless youth are identified as part of the system so that they can be moved on to a path of either reunification with their family or a safe and productive, successful adulthood. And so we're making very, very steady progress on getting to the amount of funding that's needed to really address holistically that whole set of issues. Over 4,000 young people in our state on any given night, not affiliated with their family, are homeless. Might be as many as 5,000. And we also really recognize that these services, trigger as young as 12, 13 years old, but probably need to be sustained up through age 24. Because who among us isn't really actually
right,
needing some sort of a adult interest in their lives and support and mentorship up through their early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
and then on to 30s.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is arbitrary 18-year-old cutoff. And then you're on your own.
Right.
Just sets these young people up for failure. So, it's not the same kind of services from 18 to 24, but it's it's the same basic continuity of services that we need to provide. And that was a big policy achievement as well.